It's 5 o'clock p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The latest wave of COVID-19 in South Korea continues to subside. Today saw the fewest new cases in 2 months at 346. South Korea is working to speed up its COVID-19 vaccination schedule. The government says it's going to set up more than 200 vaccination centers across the country, and they'll open in 3 or 4 weeks. Banji reports.
South Korea plans to set up 250 vaccination centers across the country, as the first batch of doses is expected to arrive in the coming weeks. Each of these centers will be able to vaccinate at least 600, and some centers up to 3,000 people a day. A center that can vaccinate 3,000 people will need 110 healthcare workers, including 20 doctors and 40 nurses. The Ministry of the Interior and Safety said it is currently working with local governments to find spots suitable for distributing the vaccines. The inoculation sites will be located where it is possible to operate ultra-cold freezers 24/7 to store vaccines. And they will be set up where it is convenient in terms of transportation and large enough for visitors to socially distance themselves from one another. The government currently has a total of 150 candidate sites, including 93 indoor stadiums and 30 performance centers. As well as these centers, people will also be able to get the shots at 10,000 medical centers nationwide. The Ministry of the Interior and Safety also added that the first vaccines will likely be available before the Lunar New Year holiday, which begins on February 11th. Meanwhile, the country reported 346 new COVID-19 cases on Friday, the lowest figure the country has seen in 2 months. 배은지, Arirang News.
On his first full day in office Thursday, U.S. President Joe Biden signed a flurry of executive orders to establish a national strategy aimed at containing the COVID-19 pandemic. He vowed to ramp up vaccine supplies, and he ordered mask wearing in places like planes, trains, and federal buildings where he has the authority to do so. Choi Min-jung reports.
The newly elected U.S. president's first full day at the White House started off with the signing of executive orders aimed at tackling the COVID-19 pandemic.
Today, I am unveiling a national strategy on COVID-19 and executive actions to beat this pandemic.
In his first briefing on the pandemic on Thursday, Biden issued 10 executive orders addressing the situation, adding to the first round of orders signed on Inauguration Day. Biden unveiled strategies to contain the current health crisis by first promising to ramp up vaccination supplies.
Our plan starts with mounting an aggressive, safe, and effective vaccination campaign to meet our goal of administering 100 million shots in our first 100 days in office.
Under Biden's order, 100 vaccination centers will be set up within a month, with vaccination programs for local pharmacies to begin next month. On top of Wednesday's mask mandate order on federal property, Biden added that people must wear masks in airports as well as on planes, trains, and buses. The new order also requires foreigners to test negative for COVID-19 prior to arriving in the U.S. and self-quarantine for 2 weeks upon arrival. He also sought to reopen schools under safe guidance. In a White House press briefing moments after Biden's sign-off, U.S. top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci and White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki gave an update on the administration's vaccine efforts. Fauci noted that the new administration will not completely abandon strategies from the Trump administration, but will continue the work by amplifying methods. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in has received a letter from British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, formally inviting him to the G7 summit this June. The top office said Friday that in his letter, Johnson said it's important that Seoul's voice is reflected as the world focuses this year on tackling COVID-19 and promoting carbon neutrality and free trade. He also thanked President Moon for inviting him to the P4G summit that'll be held in Seoul in May, and that the UK will be taking part. Moon is expected to reply that he will participate in the G7 summit. Separately, President Moon spoke on the phone with his Costa Rican counterpart, Carlos Alvarado, to discuss cooperation on COVID-19 and eco-friendly projects. Alvarado thanked South Korea for its support in fighting the virus and emphasized cooperation with South Korean companies in efforts to reduce carbon emissions. He also invited Moon to visit Costa Rica and to join a summit of the Central American Integration System to be held in June. The European Central Bank, as widely expected, has decided to keep interest rates where they are at 0%. In the latest surge in COVID-19 infections, the ECB said risks for the Eurozone outlook are tilted to the downside, but less pronounced. Lee Seung-jae has more.
As widely expected, the European Central Bank on Thursday held its interest rates at 0% while leaving its program of unconventional monetary policy unchanged. This comes as the central bank launched a pandemic-specific bond buying program to support the economy through the pandemic and has offered cheap credit to banks in order to encourage lending. During a press conference Thursday, ECB President Christine Lagarde warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is still posing serious risks to the Eurozone economy as lockdowns are tightened across the region.
Nonetheless, the pandemic continues to pose serious risks to public health and to the euro area and global economies. The renewed surge in COVID-19 infections and the restrictive and prolonged containment measures imposed in many euro area countries are disrupting economic activity.
Lagarde also emphasized the importance of monetary stimulus during the pandemic.
In this environment, ample monetary stimulus remains essential to preserve favorable financing conditions over the pandemic period for all sectors of the economy. By helping to reduce uncertainty and bolster confidence, this will encourage consumer spending and business investment.
With more than 16 million COVID-19 infections in the EU, 2021 has begun with stricter social restrictions and national lockdowns. Considering the economic uncertainty, the central bank vowed to update its policies whenever necessary. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on.
Good afternoon.
Well, as things settle down from the U.S. election, investors are still looking forward to new stimulus from the Biden administration. On Wall Street, the Dow and the S&P not moving much on Thursday, but the Nasdaq had a solid gain. Obviously, people are wondering whether valuations are too high. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, after the inauguration of the U.S. market kind of taking a little bit of breather. On the day of inauguration, the market jumped quite significantly, but yesterday, market kind of stayed flat. Dow Jones was down by about 0.1%. S&P edged up very slightly by 0.1%. And also Nasdaq slightly rose by about 0.6%. All in all, we already know that the economic conditions still poor. Despite that, continuation of the policies that are positive for the economy, including the quite aggressive monetary policy as well as the fiscal policy, is making the market to be quite steady. I think that you need some more of the actual number coming through, particularly on economic numbers as well as the earnings number in the future in order for the market to further go up. Most of the December results are coming in, and most likely these numbers should be reasonably in line. I think the market is looking for somewhat more improvement for the first quarter results. For the time being, though, because of the ample liquidity and that the direction is in the right direction, that the earnings and economic growth rates are all improving, we think that the market should be reasonably okay for the time being. We just need some more of positive signals for the market to go up further.
And today in Korea, stocks were up and down through the session. Ultimately, both main indices closing lower. Retail investors were big buyers, though. Tell us about the local markets.
Yes, pretty much the same as what U.S. market did. Because U.S. market did not show further direction, Korean market, after quite significant rise, it took some breather. It was down around 0.6% somewhat. And the reason for that is because we continue to see quite large case of the COVID-19, as well as some of the uncertainties regarding the economic recovery for the global scale. But nevertheless, quite a lot of the numbers are coming out, seems to be showing that the economy is improving on a global scale. The export numbers, we'll talk about a little bit more later, but all in all, it seems to indicate that COVID-19 issues are dwindling down in terms of the overall economic activities. So therefore, our market is probably in a good position to further go up once the improvement comes through and the earnings are coming through in a positive direction. We do think that the Korea's earnings are going to rise quite significantly this year. It's just question is how much. I think the market is pricing in somewhere around 20% plus of earnings growth this year. If that numbers becomes higher than expected, then obviously market can go up further.
You alluded to exports, and we do see that Korea's exports in the first 20 days of this year were up about almost 11% from the same period last year. It's expected that they could continue to improve this year despite the pandemic. Tell us more about the story in exports.
Yes, South Korea's export rose about 10.6% on the year, the first 20 days of January. The actual shipment amount amounted about 28.2 billion in the first 20 days versus 25.5 billion a year earlier. So clearly quite a sizable improvement. And the level of the growth per day is actually doing very well. So this is the positive implications and that the overall export numbers are improving for Korea. The improvement coming from the outbound shipment of memory chips that showed a 11.6% year-on-year growth rate. And also the oil sectors gained 15.7% year-on-year. And telecommunication devices actually soared 60.5%. All in all, we are very positive about the semiconductor cycle. We are expecting semiconductor cycle to be very positive for year 2021 as well as year 2022. If that kind of trend happens, then we might see super cycle of semiconductor business. And if we're seeing this kind of thing happening, then the semiconductor equipment side will be also improving. A lot of the electronic goods side will be improving as well. So all in all, these numbers are definitely indicating that the Korean market, Korean economic growth rate will improve in the future. That will result into better Kospi index in the future.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
The World Trade Organization has ruled in favor of South Korea in its lawsuit against the U.S. over Washington's high tariffs on local steel and power transformer products. According to Seoul's trade ministry on Friday, the WTO panel said all 8 of Washington's tariffs on those products violate the rules. Seoul filed the lawsuit in February 2018, objecting to the tariffs applied under a U.S. provision called Adverse Facts Available. That provision allows extremely high anti-dumping tariffs if a company accused of dumping does not provide the data the U.S. demands. Next month, South Korea will celebrate the Lunar New Year, known in Korean as Seoul, and the food people traditionally buy to eat and to use in ancestral rites will cost 11% more than last year. The Korea Price Research Center reviewed the average prices of food and other supplies at traditional markets nationwide and found that the cost for a typical household of 4 will be just under 234,000 won, or about $210 US. That's an increase on year of about $21. The price of apples in particular was up 22%. The agency said the rise in food prices was because of last summer's floods, this year's cold wave, and outbreaks of animal diseases at farms. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.